If we do not take this moment for what it is, we run the risk of not being a fully effective military domestically and internationally.
Well, a scathing new report lays out 48 recommendations to overhaul the Canadian military amid a sexual misconduct crisis. They include changes to recruiting, training, and promotion, and permanently handing over sexual offense investigations to civilian police and courts. Now, that report was more than a year in the making, and it's the work of former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour, who joins us now. Justice Arbour, thank you for making the time to chat with us.
My pleasure.
You've been investigating what was already a well-documented problem. So what, if anything, surprised you here?
Well, I came in essentially expecting that I wouldn't have that much to investigate because the extent of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces had been well documented, not only in the landmark report by Justice Deschamps in 2015, but since then by certainly the final settlement of the Adrienne class action, Statistics Canada's surveys, the Auditor General. There had been a lot of information, and yet when I came into this, I was amazed to hear from many, many victim survivors reaching out to me to tell me this is still happening. So this, I think, in and of itself was not only shocking, very surprising. And at the same time, I was asked to look not only at sexual misconduct, but also at the link to leadership issue, training, selection of candidates for promotion, and so on. And that whole aspect had not been looked at before and proved also really quite a challenge.
Right. So given how entrenched and pervasive the problem is and was, are the ingredients for change there? And I guess what I'm asking there is why do you think this moment may be different from every other moment that's come before?
I like to think that maybe the central piece of this report, which permeates all the recommendations I make, is the necessity for the Canadian Armed Forces to open up to outside input. And I don't mean just oversight, which is essentially an after-the-fact analysis and criticism. I mean first of all, getting outsiders to do things that they do better. The profession of arms is probably very good at what it does. I can't judge that, but Canada has a really good reputation. What it's not as good as is in a lot of other things: education, justice, some management of human resources. And for that, I think they have to break this kind of commitment to fixing everything themselves and reach out.
I guess the question is, do you think they're capable of that magnitude of change?
Well, part of the question is, will their political masters make them do what they may or may not be naturally inclined to do? They weren't naturally inclined a few decades ago to include women in their ranks. This came from the outside. It came from court orders and human rights tribunal decision orders. We live in a constitutional democracy where the armed forces are answerable, are led by our political leaders, by the Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, if the political will is there, and if the leadership of the forces is on the program, if they don't stall. I think there's every reason that substantial structural change can happen.
One last question for you, if I could. Given your investigation, what would you say to victims who have, waited in many cases many long years for action and who have been disappointed at most every turn?
I think the first thing I would say is none of this would have happened without you. That's the very starting point. And frankly, I should add, without the media having given a kind of an amplifier, a loudspeaker to the voices of victims. It took the courage of some to come forward. And then if you look at the class action, which the federal government settled for some $900 million, which received over 19,000 claims that are being processed. Without this, no hope of change would have ever been forthcoming. I hope it won't be as slow as it's been up to now, but at the very least, I think they should take a lot of pride in having stepped forward in that fashion.
Justice Arbour, thank you for making this time.
Sure, my pleasure.
Now, next, we're going to speak with someone who has firsthand experience, decades of it, with the Canadian Armed Forces, and someone who herself reported several acts of misconduct with no resolution. Catherine Bergeron, welcome. You were a reservist for nearly 10 years, right? With the military police for 15 as well.
Correct, yes.
Can you tell us what the range was of what you had to deal with during all that time?
I first joined the infantry reservist. I was just 17 years old. I turned 17 that month. And I had to, from my underage, as a 17-year-old, I had to endure sexual misconduct, having male show their penis to me, having male, when I was sleeping during courses, put their penis on my face, masturbate while I was sleeping on top of my bed, masturbate around me. If I was having showers, they would walk into the showers laughing. I would report this to my supervisors, which I was told, if you don't like it, you can quit. And at that time, I took it upon myself to become more looking like a man, so I wouldn't be seen like a woman, cutting my hair short and acting a lot like a man, just so I didn't have these types of harassment, and it still went on. I had adult male leering at me. I reported that as a 17-year-old, and this person was sent to a different section, but I was penalized with the remainder of the group, that I was the problem seeker and not the other person.
And so not only, sorry to interrupt there, but not only did you have to endure this at such a young age, but over such a long period, you're saying that you were in fact the one reprimanded and punished for this. And so, I mean, knowing that, when you see the recommendations that came out today, you know, including allowing victims to access the civilian justice system directly to avoid precisely the kind of problem that you had to deal with, how does that leave you feeling?
In my personal opinion, there's no way that any type of military personnel should be investigating any type of just sexual misconduct or sexual assaults or anything like that, that being military police or even supervisors at the unit level, because it is always a hierarchy, and the chain of command is always looking for their best interests to protect themselves and the higher ups. It's never for the best interest of the victim, which is often at the lower rank level.
So with the changes then that Justice Arbour has recommended and that the Minister of Defense seems intent on implementing, particularly on that point, do you think that the military is capable of an about-face on all of this? You know, from what you've seen, from what you've experienced, is it capable of that kind of a fundamental shift in how it treats women?
In the 24 years I've served in the military, that being a military police or an infantry, it has never changed. The community is just a community that is so used to this type of misconduct. It has never changed in 20 years and it will never change. It has to be pushed forward to outside agency, third parties, civilian police force. It's the only way it's going to be implemented properly, and people are going to be penalized for what they've done. And the victim will have voices.
I know you'll be watching all of this very closely, as will we. Catherine Bergeron, really nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.